And welcome to this webinar. My name is Gary Tuch. I look after client relationships on behalf of Intuitus, and I'd extend a very warm welcome to everybody on this webinar. Thank you very much for taking the time to join. We hope you find it interesting and of value, and please do have some questions as you go through, and we'll look at those at the end. If you can populate your questions through that function online, you'll see the ability to ask questions through the questions link. So please do post them there, and we'll pick them up at the end. On the call, on the webinar rather, with me, I have two colleagues that I will be introducing right now. One is Graham Logan. Graham is a experienced due diligence consultant that's worked with Intuitus for a number of years, and is going to walk through the subject matter of today, which is effectively why bother, in fact, with technology due diligence during lockdown. Why is it of value? Surely it's something that we can kind of skip in the drive to get deals done quickly, question mark. And Graham's been active in many of our transactions so far this year, so we thought an excellent candidate to speak to that topic. And Rob Gibson, a managing consultant who's responsible for the delivery of our work and therefore has significant insight as well. But Graham will be driving the majority of the speaking part, and we hope you find that of interest. So in terms of the sort of agenda, next slide, Lindsay, if possible, I wanted to give you an overview of just how we see the sort of market at the minute, looking at some of the, let's say, the more unique characteristics that we've seen during this very strange time, through which I hope you are all and your families have stayed safe and well. How has that affected investment? What are the key characteristics of the market and the dynamics as we see them? And I'll cover that off, and then I think we'll pass to Graham to talk about. So let's remind ourselves what exactly is technology due diligence, because it has changed its shape and its form quite substantially over just the last few years, not least, of course, in the last few months. How does that look in terms of the life cycle of a project, and how does that bear on the approach that we take to doing due diligence? Why then is technology due diligence of value given the market characteristics that we see, and what's different? And we hope at the end of this agenda you'll be left with a clear view that actually, more so than ever, it is relevant and insightful and helpful to undertake technology due diligence or digital due diligence during this time. So turning to the next slide, the current dynamics that we see, let me start by saying, in terms of deals completed, we've probably worked on maybe 20, 25 that have completed during lockdown. That is, I think, quite a high number from what we might have expected at the beginning of lockdown, end of March, where, as you probably would imagine, the sort of tech landscape in terms of deal flow kind of fell off a cliff, as I'm sure it did for all sort of involved in this market from a kind of deal flow perspective. However, as we kind of got to grips with the various kind of implications of COVID-19 world and its machinations, there was a return to some degree of transaction, which I think was quite positive and surprising, which we've seen in the last certainly 6 to 8 weeks pick up substantially. We've seen, though, some interesting dynamics during that change, one or two of which are as follows. Deal timelines have shortened significantly. So there is almost a, perhaps driven by sellers and sell-side advisors, a drive to get assets sold quickly, and that can manifest itself in limited access to management. It can be a limited amount of information available to make and inform your decision. It can be timelines are extremely aggressive, and that we're seeing as well some strategic buyers coming in last minute to make trumping bids where previously we would have expected that not to have certainly happened as much. So some key dynamics I think that are currently in play that are substantially different from where we have seen things previously. But as I mentioned, we are seeing a deal uptick quite substantially, and that might be in the UK driven by a number of things, not least of which might be the potential increase in capital gains, decrease in capital gains tax, that if you like, the normalising of it with income tax, which was to be in Rishi Sunak's budget, which got postponed, is likely to be in Q1, is so anticipated. And whilst there is a lobby in there to try to offset that and prevent it from happening, I think there's a general expectation that that capital gains tax figure is in fact going to increase in Q1. So part of the reason for this deal uptick could well be that. We are seeing quite an uptick in the last period, with people looking to drive transactions and completions very quickly. So I think those are the key dynamics that we see in play. So next slide, please, Lindsay. I'm now going to pass on to Graham to pick up the conversation from here on, starting with what exactly is due diligence.
Thank you, Gary. So as Gary said, I'm Graham Logan. Maybe a little bit of background. I've been involved in mergers and acquisition activity for a long time, before my engagement with Intuitus. I was originally at Compaq, where at the time we acquired Digital Equipment, which was, for instance, the largest IT transaction ever done at the time. And then a few years later was acquired by Hewlett Packard, which was also the largest technology acquisition at the time. And then joining HP, one of the roles I held throughout my tenure there for nearly 20 years and overall, was always involved in mergers and acquisition and supporting deals such as Snapfish and Mercury as they were acquired into Hewlett Packard's portfolio. I was also involved in Autonomy, which you may have heard of, great British IT software company was acquired by Hewlett Packard. I just point out that I was there after the deal was agreed, and supporting integration was not part of the due diligence for that acquisition. Also been involved in carve-outs, specifically at the centre of the definition of the architectures within the landscapes for the carve-out of Hewlett Packard into its two current entities, Hewlett Packard Enterprise and Hewlett Packard Incorporated. Before supporting Intuitus, so with must be now towards 20 or so due diligence work, both sell side and buy side, and some general portfolio work. So moving on, a brief reminder, and I'll highlight some of the differences in due diligence that have come forward recently, not necessarily different specifically by COVID, we will come to some of those. But fundamentally, due diligence, technology due diligence, is about ensuring and informing yourself around the resilience and scalability of the technology investment you're making. I mean, at the end of the day, every organization is dependent on technology. They're either developing and selling technology products, which is, we see a lot of activity there. I've been involved in many managed services and software acquisitions. Or even if their product is more traditional, they will be reliant upon it within their sales processes, their manufacturing, etc. So understanding really what is there, is it scalable? Does it meet the potential objectives over the 2 to 3 year lifespan of ownership you may have in there? Establishing the risks and weaknesses, we take a very objective view there, a very fact-based there when proposing how to close those opportunities, which then inform additional requirement investments that might be outside the current assumptions in the portfolio, in your investment thesis. Improving documentation validating security and compliance issues in the company. So if you look at the picture on the left side of this here, it's really a stack, and we're very much led and informed in due diligence by the business strategy. And by that, I mean both of the target and obviously of the hypothesis for the acquisition and the investment there, okay? What has really changed shape over the last years is as fundamentally application technology, so standard applications, servers, infrastructure, network, has become commoditized, you know, that lovely word cloud, which we'll come to a little bit. It's still relevant in due diligence, don't get me wrong, it's still very important, but actually the role of policy and processes that control that, security and compliance, and particularly the relationship with suppliers and partners, which fundamentally are delivering those services to the business. There's a lot more focus on those, and quite rightly so. As many companies we look at, I'm involved in one currently, which is highly technology leveraged as a company to use technology products. They don't run any of their own infrastructure. They have no IT department. And there really we're looking at the policies, supplier relationships that allow them to deliver that to them as a business entity, separately from the products they support and develop in the marketplaces. Next slide. So what does Intuitus bring to the table? Right? I'm sure you've been taken through this, the value proposition, you understand why you're here, but it's worthy of a reminder, right? We're a broad, experienced network of CIOs and CTOs, right? Roughly 150 of us in the network, as I understand it currently, myself being one. I held the Chief Technology Officer role at Hewlett-Packard in the IT organizations there for a number of years. We have a broad range of backgrounds from travel and retail and technology and manufacturing and pharmaceuticals and care homes and care support. Most of the consultants network, I would say almost entirely all of us, are still very active in the industry, right? We're on expert panels. We may hold leadership roles in organizations in parallel with taking on Intuitus due diligence work. Many of us hold board level roles. I myself, although I'm from a technology manufacturing background, Hewlett-Packard, I'm on the board of directors for a housing association, one of Scotland's largest, which gives me a different insight, not just to the business, but to a different market segment and how technology can apply and bring input there in care delivery and so on. We bring a customer perspective because within those roles, the network are buying and utilizing services, right? So within that role as on the board of the Housing Association, I'm reviewing and looking at procurement of technology services. I understand what's in the market and how they're being offered and sold and what the differentiators are. So we see both sides of it from a delivery point of view of creating those technologies when we potentially worked in technology companies, and from an acquisitions point of view. And that's a balance that gets brought out in the reports often. Peer review, okay? When we go into these companies and chat to them, we're going in there as peers of the senior technologists in the organization, right? I've been involved with consultancy companies in a number of places, not within them, but buying their services. And the idea that somebody's turned up at a college on graduation day with a bus and just rolled out a bunch of consultants, it does feel like that sometimes, okay? So we're very much there talking as experts to experts. We can get under the skin. We understand how people are working. And as I say, most of us have been involved in real world M&A, not just assessing it, but actually selling companies, buying organizations, and we bring that expertise into the processes with us. I think Gary touched on this. We typically, over the lifespan of Intuitus, we've done around about 2,000 completed deals and associated portfolio services. That's a mass of experience and leverageable documentation and insights that we bring to the table on each new deal. And it's supported by a very strong program structure. I mean, Rob here supports many of the programs I'm involved in. We have subject matter experts that are part of the network as well. So maybe not held CIO roles, but they've held heads of development roles or operational support directors roles, and we bring them into projects to leverage their expertise as well. And we have a very strong quality control process that runs with professional technical authors. And frankly, if you read the grammar in some of these slides and spelling, you'll be clear they didn't actually run through them in this case, but normally our reports always do. So next slide. Typical life cycle is worth just reviewing that and what we undertake at each stage, and this starts to touch on what is different. Okay. So we have pre-work. When we first get a view of the deal, we understand the investment manifesto that's there, the IM documents, if they exist. I personally, and most of the network, we would do a lot of public data researching on the company and the targets and understand how they are positioned and seen in the market prior to us establishing actually fairly standard document request list, which is going to be informed by what we see as the risks and the market segments and the type of business they're in. And our additional documentation review. Actually, I've missed out the word review. This back to my quality comment from before. On that, so that we're actually setting up these meetings and gathering the input in the next phase from an informed background, rather than walking in cold with simply a scope document to start with. We're assessing within those meetings, though, we're doing a couple of things beyond just gathering information, right? One of the key things is we're assessing the team that's in place, and I'll use the phrase target, the target of the transaction, okay? And that's important because a lot of what you're buying into or investing in is, yes, it's the technology, clearly it's the clients and the customer base, but it's also the people that brought that together to the point that makes it interesting for you to potentially make these investments. So assessing the team, the leadership team that's in place is key, and a lot of that will come out through the meeting process and as we interact with people. Obviously, that leads on to our document review. We start to do analysis. We dig into the data, validate the information is correct. We follow up on accreditations, etc. We start to test some of the hypotheses that have been put forward in the IM. Will the technology roadmap really support that volume of growth that's being proposed? Is there something missing? Are the investments planned, financial investments, CapEx being put down, likely to bring that capability to the table? Is there hiring gaps that need to be put in place, etc.? And start to look towards benchmarking. Based upon those 2,000 deals and some other public data, we start to understand where the maturity of that organization is in the landscape as a whole, and that also helps feed and our recommendations and reviews. Okay. That process, and this is one of the things that's changed significantly with during the COVID times, these recent times, is that process has become much more iterative. And there's a couple of reasons for that we'll come on to in the next slides when we get there. But it's to note that typically that would have been a couple of days on-site meetings, followed by some review and analysis, maybe some email exchanges back and forward, or a single follow-up call, and then the report would magically appear. Okay, and that process become much more iterative. And if we go on to the next, before we go to the next slide, obviously the output document, which is what you get in your hands, right? We draft the reports. This takes much longer than many people expect, because getting it right is important, setting the tone is important, and then the quality control process takes 1 to 2 days. Clearly, we have a client review with that document. We inform the client. We don't just send it over. We then offer and sit down with them and go through the executive summary, for instance. And in a sell side engagement, will often be available post our engagement to inform or discuss with potential investors about the document that we produced and the reviews and so on. And that might lead to some updates. And our update process is pretty clear. We don't change our opinion unless the facts have changed. And that's the independence and the strength of our reporting process. Okay. Move on to the next slide, please. So a little bit about why I undertake due diligence, and we'll move forward. Is exploding the market, right? No, sorry, explode the marketing. Sorry, my apologies. I'm a technology person, right? 25 years in technology of various types, mostly around IT. I don't like the word cloud, and I don't like the word big data. I'm sure many of you will have seen or references to, oh, cloud's just a computer at the end of a long cable. Well, as a technology professional, I would agree with them. In a lot of the deployments we see, it really is just the server that was under somebody's desk sitting in, thankfully now, a managed and controlled data center, but fundamentally nothing has changed. Right? And getting behind some of those terms to really understand what is that product they're selling, and just because they've said all of our business applications in the cloud, that's great, but if they don't talk to each other and there's no consistency between them of what does a customer look like or what does an order look like, it won't flow through the business process or the application supporting the business process. So getting behind some of the marketing. That outside-in view, is the team right for the future? The team on the table that's there, is the current technology director who's brought the company to where they are? Are they the right person as it maybe moves into an exploding development phase? You've gone through initial product creation, you're maybe in a position of sustain, and now there's a spread out of the market. Technology's moved on. Have those people got the right skills to bring to the table? Can the technologies that are being deployed scale, right? Cloud is cloud, but not all cloud scale is the same, right? The differences between software as a service and platform as a service and infrastructure as a service, drawing those out against the hypotheses that have been made in the investment. That leads on to challenging the IM assumptions. Is the R&D spend planned at the budget level? Because we go down into budget level and budget level reviews. Does it really reflect what we believe is going to cost to bring those products to market or upgrade those internal technologies to appropriate levels and close the gaps? Other organizational gaps that are there, either skill-based or just fundamentally, they've developed a software product, they're supporting it by ad hoc contact calls through sales teams. If that goes to market and supports more and more customers, they need to be planning how they're going to put in place, say, customer support and service desk, and staff it appropriately and tool it appropriately. Is that in the investment assumptions? Okay. All of that is linked to de-risking some of the deal strategy that's there. As Gary mentioned, the timelines are shrinking. So quite often we're being asked currently to do very rapid red flag assessments. It's something in the technology landscape and roadmap that would immediately say, look, this is a really risky direction. It needs to be better informed, or pause. And also looking to validate very rapidly some of the liabilities that are there, particularly with applications that are deployed in the software as a service type applications being taken to market. Many of them embed and utilize licensed applications or open source applications. Open source applications have some very complex licensing agreements with them. It's not just download and use, and they can open an organization up to significant liabilities. Part of what we're looking and delivering is helping you quantify the risks in the technology and the operation. Okay, do you have potential liabilities in the assets that are there? There are weaknesses that are there. And also, we normally provide, or we always provide, a roadmap to close out the risks and weaknesses. But on top of that, we will often look and provide, potentially post-deal activities that can support there. Hiring a new CIO or technology director. There's these things we can help with and inform or put on work with you on that. Major landscape redesigns or bringing in people specialists to document things. You can have good products, good teams, but poor documentation can be a risk. Well, if the team's not got the documentation up to date after 2 years developing a product, then maybe they don't have the skills to do it. So that's something that can kind of be brought to the table in our overall recommendations. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's maybe focus a little bit more on what is different, right? I mentioned the life cycle and the iteration. One of the things, very practically, you just from a really pragmatic point of view, we've replaced the face-to-face meetings with video calls. And you can say, well, what's changed, right? What has really changed in that is, and it's just really simple practical things, is people's attention span on video calls is short, okay? You don't get visibility of the organization or the people beyond those who are invited in the meeting. We can have problems identifying or getting insights, and that kind of talks about the people queues to people. Large board level Zoom meetings with 20 people in it. It's a very different interaction characteristics to having one-on-one meetings, even if it's just around the coffee machine on a breakout from a physical face-to-face meeting. Okay. So what we tend to find is we want to set up shorter targeted meetings with individuals or small groups, 1 hour at a time, then do feedback and analysis, and then do the next meeting, so we can break the sessions up for focus. It's also become a challenge for it. Again, it seems trivial, but scheduling those is very difficult, because when you are coming on site, and fundamentally, if somebody's paying for the travel and the hotel and whatever else, it's not a lot in the scheme of things. Meetings tend not to get moved once you've agreed them that it's a Tuesday and it's Tuesday all day and Wednesday morning. I'm finding that it's very easy for somebody just to pause or change or update a Zoom call, and suddenly the project timelines are blown, and we have to come back in either through the advisors we're working with or back to the management team and say, look, these meetings are getting moved. We need some help controlling the timings on these things, or we can't make the deliverable times. There's also there's a unique opportunity currently, and has been, to validate disaster recovery and business continuity, because every company we'll have looked at has just executed their business continuity plan. Well, hopefully they had one. We normally find that out in due diligence. And even if they had one, there will be lessons they've learned. So by going in now and understanding that, we can validate, are those lessons being taken back into the business continuity plan? Are next year's budgets hiding that actually the business continuity plan wasn't necessarily up to date and complete, because suddenly we're seeing increased costs for disaster recovery virtual desktops for the provider, or additional laptops, or additional mobile phone connectivity and so on, that wasn't already in place. So we can both tell how successful the business continuity was by going through interview processes with them, but we can also, by just inspecting some of the plans and roadmaps going forward and investments, we get a feeling of really whether the business continuity plan executes smoothly and well. Okay, hopefully, and it's a kind of technical minor separation, the disaster recovery, they shouldn't necessarily have triggered, and they may well have done as part of this. But normally business continuity would be around the closure of the business, lack of access, sudden execution of home working. There. Validation of remote working security. You've suddenly got all these individuals who are working remotely and at home. So again, some things we can be looking at there is, has there been an increase in incidents reported in their security logs? Has the company stepped up their security awareness training? So people at home are much more exposed to social engineering. They get the phone call, they get emails in, maybe they're using a home machine, they've got an email that comes in on their private email, and they're not really thinking about it and answer it. Suddenly that endpoint that's effectively part of your company's network potentially is exposed. Okay? So we're looking there at how have they handled that, how they as well as the normal expectations around training and phishing testing for these kind of emails and social engineering activities. Have they stepped that up? Have they focused on the home working aspects of those more that are there? Things we also miss by not going on site, and these are the three that really get tied into the lack of on-site access, is it's very difficult for us to identify technology hygiene issues. Now, what do I mean by that? Technology hygiene issues are things like, yes, we have a server in our office, which is quite normal. Print servers, for instance, are typically in an office. But is it in a cabinet? Is the cabinet locked? Has there got adequate heating and ventilation around it? Okay. The policies and documentation may say so, but it's interesting what you find when you walk around. Okay. An example: I was in a very large tier 1 mainstream data center provider, the name nameless, for a client who hosted in their premises. Their documentation, and that was ISO 27001 certified, very clear, etc. They had documented a separate build room, which is what we like to see, because unpacking servers and building them separately from the production environment is a very positive thing. What we actually found in walking around was the gaps between the servers and the racks was full of cardboard boxes. That is a huge fire risk. Okay, we never told that remotely. We wouldn't have seen that from the documentation because somebody wasn't following the documentation. So validation, those simple hygiene issues, cables hanging from ceilings because somebody's just punched a hole through to an extension temporarily. It's never come back. They kind of point to an approach around managing their infrastructure and their technology. And we sort of see that. Now, we have replaced some of that in some examples with video walkarounds. Okay, so literally a WhatsApp type video call with somebody's mobile phone walking around the office, letting us look at things and asking us to direct them. A little bit like unsophisticated artificial reality, if you like. Maybe we should invest in that, Gary. We get some AR headsets so we can do remote data center walkarounds. I'll ask Santa for that. Or trusted third parties. So in a couple of cases with jobs that we've been on, we've asked for trusted third parties because maybe there's a UK travel ban or a France travel ban where the target company is, so you can't travel into the country, but somebody within the country can visit the data center. So we agree there's interim or trusted third party to do some inspections on our behalf. We also miss out looking on security culture. Again, back to that validation of policies and processes. Most companies we'd expect to see, or would be delightful to see, a clean working desk policy, right, as part of the security. How do you tell that's true? You tell that's true by visiting the office at 9 in the morning when you first arrive at the meetings and 5 o'clock at night when you leave, or 7 o'clock or whatever, and see whether it really is being applied. I once visited a Target recently, not recently, so before COVID in this case, clearly, where the gentleman in front of me who let me tailgate them, and that's an expression where you kind of come through security just following somebody without showing your badge, etc., turned out to be the head of security. And that was my first meeting of the day. I pointed to a very different security culture that was reflected in the documentation. Yeah. And he didn't know me, and even if he had known me, he shouldn't have let me in. That's there. And we talked about people queues. We do pick up a lot, many of us pick up a lot from the interaction with individuals, just seeing how people delegate to their boss or their management teams there. You can see that subtle movements. It's very difficult to pick up on video cues. We also are limited to who we interact with more. On site, if somebody doesn't know something or isn't sure, it's very easy for them just to go and ask Mary at her desk, or get us to walk out and review something at Rob's workstation, which are under development. Those things become much more difficult to do, those ad hoc activities. And that gives us less insight to maturity of the team that's beyond the direct ones we're interacting with, and get some of those insights. So those are a feeling for the things that have changed. You know, a lot of it hasn't changed, right? It's about gathering the right documentation, doing the analysis, looking for proof, and you know, in an iterative manner. What's really changed are these subtle things around the edges. Okay, and kind of move on to the next slide. We kind of can maybe take a time here now for some Q&A about what we've been hearing. Happy to go back and answer questions, or to go back over certain slides that are there. Rob, I think you were going to kind of keep track of the chat window.
I am. Thank you, Graham. That was really interesting. Please do, everybody, jot your questions down in the control panel. There's a section for questions there, so please do fire them in. Graham, I've got a question for you just about the development of a scope for one of our projects. Clearly it's a joint process with us and the client, but what are your thoughts about putting that scope together? How do we get the right scope? How do we get the scope right? How do we test and adjust it? And the relevance of the investment thesis for us?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I say it works best when obviously Intuitus and the client, you know, whether the client is the acquiring investor who has a good understanding of what they're concerned about the company. It's pretty well informed by the IM, that we receive, if that's not possible, and even if it is, then from the public information to a large extent, what is the services the company offers that is there. Again, I like to think we work best when that is somewhat iterative. We do a first assessment, we put forward a fairly standard structure of scope. I don't mean every question is the same, but fundamentally you're looking at what are the products and services the company offers and technology role they play in that, the platforms that wrap around that to deliver those services, and what is the business itself, irrespective of the product. It doesn't matter if it's a technology company. They've got employees, they've got human capital management systems, they've got payroll, they've got finance, etc. And how are they running that? How are they backing up data? What's the position of security? So largely the building blocks fundamentally don't change, but the detail does. Okay, and why the iteration is important is some companies have very separate IT organizations that deliver inward facing from technology, and therefore that separation of scope is very relevant, because there'll be different processes, there'll be different approaches to doing things. They have that separation, segregation of interests. Okay, SOX as we would call it in the kind of US corporate world, SOX compliance. But other companies aren't like that. Other companies really deliver their internal IT technology to their clients through the technology team that's delivering to the customer. And therefore the scope can have a lot of overlap, and the relevance of having separate sections comes into play. So we thin that out and cut that back. So we really target on the relevant components of it. Clearly, if it's a software delivering product, we're going to add in analysis and detail around how software is being constructed, are the policies and practices, potentially bring in to scope a quality review of the source code. So there's a methodology we have access to and can apply. It gives a rating of the maintainability of the code, because that's going to be important. You build your new products on your old products in software generally. So yeah, I would say it's iterative. It's informed by the information view we have of the company. It's informed by the plans. You know, is it a growth? Is it going to be merged in with another organization? So as an acquiring, you know, the transaction may look to the target as a straight investment, but actually the investment they're not seeing is potentially that's going to be then merged in with some other activity. So that would also inform the scope. How integratable is their other systems with other parties and the skill sets? Hope that clarifies some of that.
Yeah, definitely. And interesting, you just touched on the investment thesis there, the direction or the planned direction, the intention for the investor, for the company afterwards. And it can put us in a privileged position sometimes that we need to understand that direction and that strategic intent, so that we know how to pitch and which lens, if you like, we need to apply to our work. And sometimes we know that before that's even been shared with the target, if we're in a phase one, an early part of the process, for example.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And clearly that lays down, sometimes I call our secret agent mode, which is, what we present to the target is the rationale behind our discussions, and what the actual rationales behind are very different, or can be additional relevance there. So I call it our sort of secret spy mode.
Absolutely. And you just touched on the idea of code quality reviews. Yes. And that's another product that we can offer, but there's clear benefit if the target company develops their own code. That there are clear benefits for having that code inspected, looking for technical debt and that sort of thing. That's a very beneficial additional view of what's going on within the company and within the product that we're able to get at, isn't it?
Yes, it is, very much so. It's against an industry standard benchmark model that's executed there, so there's a comparison against, I think it's roughly 1,200 other software companies. Maturity of the product, it's independent of the technology that's looked at, so it doesn't matter whether it's written in Java and web technology or whatever. The assessment can handles that and analyzes out, and it's sample based. We obviously the process doesn't crawl through all million lines of source code, right? It's a statistical sampling model, that takes over, and we analyse out for supportability and, as you say, technical depth there. And that's big because, you know, refactoring code is expensive. So just because you've changed your what I mean by refactoring, because my technology strategy has changed to, I don't know, choose this week's flavor of the month, React JavaScript framework for web development, right? And it used to be .NET produced HTML. Okay, does the same thing, puts content in the browser for the user to interact with. Do you really want to invest and change all that old code if it's not needed? And if you're not, can you continue to support it until either you're ready to change it or that product goes end of life? So that's the kind of insights you're going to get from that software quality review.
That's
very
really
good. Sorry, Rob, I think I might have cut across you there.
That's okay. I've got a dozen more questions here, Gary, but I think we might be running a little bit short of time.
Well, I think what we're planning to do is email those questions out and with the answers.
Okay, excellent.
So yeah, thank you all very much indeed for participating in this. I think the kind of summary points that we're trying to kind of make here is clearly deal dynamics are limited time, you know, to make your bid. First of all, to have it informed and make it. So obviously there's a need to quickly mitigate any obvious risks, and of course, maybe more importantly, identify upside, particularly where deal values or bids are increasing, and we're seeing a good experience of that. So the need to be confident in the technology landscape and its ability to drive growth is fundamental. And the how that Graham's been touching on there is summed up really by saying we have now adapted our scope and the method by which we undertake DD during a sort of outside-in approach, which is around either a kind of quick view of any obvious gotchas. I guess a colloquial term might have been a red flag review. That's not what we would describe ourselves, but that's maybe what you might understand it to be. Or perhaps a more fuller assessment, but done over a couple of phases, a kind of quick insight phase pre-exclusivity, if there is to be exclusivity granted, often not the case, and one during exclusivity, if in fact that's the way that the seller runs the process. So what we're really saying is that we recognize the dynamics. I think we're in a good place to be able to now take advantage of them and deliver something that will inform and advise your valuation and approach going forward, and clearly position ourselves now as being owned by a software development business in Endava. We uniquely now have the capability to deliver on the recommendations that we've been making. So a kind of one-stop shop approach, which we hope will be of value. So with that, I'll finish and say thank you all very much again, particularly to Lindsay, who's in the background doing all the hard work hosting this on our behalf. Thank you, Lindsay. And thank you to all attendees for coming in. And please do post in any follow-on questions. But otherwise, we would look to find answers to these that we have already that Rob mentioned, and we'll send them out. Contact details are at the back end that we're looking at the minute. Feel free to reach out, and stay safe and well, and have a very Merry Christmas when it comes. Thank you.